Scene 2. Inside the rectory, which is lighted, Mrs. Weinmiller comes in and makes her way stealthily to the love seat, where she seats herself. Opening her parasol, she takes out a fancy white-plumed hat which she had concealed there. Rising, she turns to the mirror on the wall over the love seat and tries on the hat. She draws a long, ecstatic breath as she places it squarely on her head. At that moment, the telephone rings. Startled, she snatches off the hat, hides it behind the center table, and quickly resumes her seat. The telephone goes on ringing. Alma comes in to answer it. Alma. Hello. Yes, Mrs. Gilliam? She did? Are you sure? How shocking. Mrs. Weinmiller now retrieves the hat, seats herself in front of Alma, and puts the hat on. Thank you, Mr. Gilliam. The hat is here. Mr. Weinmiller comes in. He is distracted. Mr. Weinmiller. Alma. Alma, your mother. Alma coming in. I know, Father. Mr. Gilliam just phoned. He told me she picked up a white-plumed hat and he pretended not to notice in order to save you the embarrassment. So I told him to just charge it to us. Mr. Weinmiller. That hat looks much too expensive. Alma. It's $14. You pay $6 of it, Father, and I'll pay $8. She gives him the parasol. Mr. Weinmiller. What an insufferable cross we have to bear. He retires despairingly from the room. Alma goes over to her mother and seats her in a chair at the table. Alma. I have 1,001 things to do before my club meeting tonight, so you work quietly on your picture puzzle or I shall take the hat back, plume and all. Mrs. Weinmiller, throwing a piece of the puzzle on the floor. The pieces don't fit. Alma picks up the piece and puts it on the table. The pieces don't fit. Alma stands for a moment in indecision. She reaches for the phone, then puts it down. Then she takes it up again and gives a number. The telephone across the way in the doctor's office rings and that part of the scene lights up. John comes in. John, answering the phone. Hello? Alma. John! She fans herself rapidly with a palm leaf clutched in her free hand and puts on a brilliant, strained smile as if she were actually in his presence. John. Miss Alma? Alma. You recognized my voice? John. I recognized your laugh. Alma. How are you, you stranger, you? John. I'm pretty well, Miss Alma. How are you doing? Alma. Surviving. Just surviving. Isn't it fearful? John. Uh-huh. Alma. You seem unusually laconic. Or perhaps I should say more than usually laconic. John. I had a big night and I'm just recovering from it. Alma. Well, sir, I have a bone to pick with you. John. What's that, Miss Alma? He drains a glass of bromo. Alma. The time of our last conversation on the 4th of July, you said you were going to take me riding in your automobile. John. Oh, did I say that? Alma. Yes, indeed you did, sir. And all these hot afternoons I've been breathlessly waiting and hoping that you would remember that promise. But now I know how insincere you are. Haha. Time and again the four-wheeled phenomenon flashes by the rectory, and I have yet to put my quaking foot in it. Mrs. Weinmiller begins to mock Alma's speech and laughter. John. What was that, Miss Alma? I didn't understand you. Alma. I was just reprimanding you, sir. Castigating you verbally. Haha. Mrs. Weinmiller grimacing. Haha. John. What about, Miss Alma? He leans back and puts his feet on the table. Alma. Never mind. I know how busy you are. She whispers. Mother. Hush. John. I'm afraid we have a bad connection. Alma. I hate telephones. I don't know why, but they always make me laugh as if someone were poking me in the ribs. I swear to goodness they do. John. Why don't you just go to your window and I'll go to mine and we can holler across? Alma. The yard's so wide, I'm afraid it would crack my voice. And I've got to sing at somebody's wedding tomorrow. John, you're going to sing at a wedding? Alma, yes. The voice that breathed over Eden. And I'm as hoarse as a frog. Another gale of laughter almost shakes her off her feet. John, better come over and let me give you a gargle. Alma, nasty gargles, I hate them. Mrs. Weinmiller mockingly, nasty gargles, I hate them. Alma, mother, shh, please. As you no doubt have gathered, there is some interference at this end of the line. What I wanted to say is, you remember my mentioning that little club I belong to? John, yes, those intellectual meetings. Alma, oh, now don't call it that. It's just a little informal gathering every Wednesday, and we talk about the new books and read things out loud to each other. John, serve any refreshments? Alma, yes, we serve refreshments. John, any liquid refreshments? Alma, both liquid and solid refreshments. John, is this an invitation? Alma, didn't I promise I'd ask you? It's going to be tonight, at 8 at my house at the rectory. So all you'll have to do is cross the yard. John, I'll try to make it, Miss Alma. Alma, don't say try as if it required some Herculean effort. All you have to do is, John, cross the yard. Uh-huh. Reserve me a seat by the punch bowl. Alma, that gives me an idea. We will have punch. Fruit punch with claret in it. Do you like claret? John, I just dote on claret. Alma, now you're being sarcastic. John, excuse me, Miss Alma, but Dad's got to use this phone. Alma, I won't hang up till you've said you'll come without fail. John, I'll be there, Miss Alma. You can count on it. Alma, au revoir then, until 8. John, goodbye, Miss Alma. John hangs up with an incredulous grin. Alma remains holding the phone with a dazed smile until the office interior has dimmed slowly out. Mrs. Weinmiller. Alma's in love, she waltzes mockingly. Alma, sharply. Mother, you are wearing out my patience. Now, I am expecting another music pupil, and I have to make preparations for the club meeting. So I suggest that you... Nellie rings the bell. Will you go up to your room? Then she calls sweetly. Yes, Nellie. Coming, Nellie. All right, stay down here then. But keep your attention on your picture puzzle, or there will be no ice cream for you after supper. She admits Nellie, who is wildly excited over something. This scene should be played lightly and quickly. Nellie. Oh, Miss Alma. She rushes past Alma in a distracted manner, throws herself and hugs herself with excited glee. Alma. What is it, Nellie? Has something happened at home? Nellie continues her exhilaration. Oh, now, Nellie, stop that. Whatever it is, it can't be that important. Nellie, blurting out suddenly. Miss Alma, haven't you ever had crushes? Alma. What? Nellie. Crushes. Alma. Yes, I suppose I have. She sits down. Nellie. Did you know that I used to have a crush on you, Miss Alma? Alma. No, Nellie. Nellie. Why do you think that I took singing lessons? Alma. I supposed it was because you wished to develop your voice. Nellie, cutting in. Oh, you know and I know I never had any voice. I had a crush on you, though. Those were the days when I had crushes on girls. Those days are all over, and now I have crushes on boys. Oh, Miss Alma, you know about Mother, how I was brought up so nobody nice except you would have anything to do with us. Mother meeting the trains to pick up the traveling salesmen and bring them home to drink and play poker. All of them acting like pigs. Pigs, pigs. Mrs. Weinmiller mimicking. Pigs, pigs, pigs. Nellie, well, I thought I'd always hate men, loathe and despise them, but last night, oh. Alma, hadn't we better run over some scales until you are feeling calmer? Nellie, cutting in. I'd heard them downstairs for hours, but didn't know who it was. I'd fallen asleep. when all of a sudden my door banged open. He thought it was the bathroom. Alma, nervously. Nellie, I'm not sure I want to hear any more of this story. Nellie, interrupting. Guess who it was? Alma. I couldn't possibly guess. Nellie. Someone you know. Someone I've seen you with. Alma. Who? Nellie. The wonderfulest person in all the big wide world. When he saw it was me, he came and sat down on the bed and held my hand, and we talked and talked until Mother came up to see what had happened to him. You should have heard him bawl her out. Oh, he laid the law down. He said she ought to send me off to a girls' school because she wasn't fit to bring up a daughter. Then she started to bawl him out. You're a fine one to talk, she said. You're not fit to call yourself a doctor. Alma rises abruptly. Alma. John Buchanan? Nellie. Yes, of course, Dr. Johnny. Alma. Was with your mother? Nellie. Oh, he wasn't her beau. He had a girl with him, and Mother had somebody else. Alma. Who did he have? Nellie. Oh, some loud, tacky thing with a Z in her name. Alma. Gonzalez? Rosa Gonzalez? Nellie. Yes, that was it. Alma sits slowly back down. But him. Oh, Miss Alma, he's the wonderfulest person that I... Alma, interrupting. Your mother was right. He isn't fit to call himself a doctor. I hate to disillusion you, but this wonderfulest person is pitiably weak. Someone calls Johnny outside. Nellie in hushed excitement. Someone is calling him now. Alma. Yes. These people who shout his name in front of his house are of such a character that the old doctor cannot permit them to come inside the door. And when they have brought him home at night, left him sprawling on the front steps, sometimes at daybreak it takes two people, his father and the old cook, one pushing and one pulling, to get him upstairs. She sits down. All the gifts of the gods were showered on him. The call of Johnny is repeated, but all he cares about is indulging his senses. Another call of Johnny. Nellie, here he comes down the steps. Alma crosses toward the window. Look at him jump. Alma. Oh. Nellie, over the banisters. Alma. Nellie, don't lean out the window and have us caught spying. Mrs. Weinmiller suddenly. Show Nellie how you spy on him. Oh, she's a good one at spying. She stands behind the curtain and peeks around it. And Alma frantically. Mother. Mrs. Weinmiller. She spies on him. Whenever he comes in at night, she rushes downstairs to watch him out of this window. Alma interrupting her. Be still. Mrs. Weinmiller going right on. She called him just now and had a fit on the telephone. The old lady cackles derisively. Alma snatches her cigarette from her and crushes it under her foot. Alma's in love. Alma's in love. Alma interrupting. Nellie, please go. Nellie with a startled giggle. All right, Miss Alma, I'm going. She crosses quickly to the door, looking back once with a grin. Good night, Mrs. Weinmiller. Nellie goes out gaily, leaving the door slightly open. Alma rushes to it and slams it shut. She returns swiftly to Mrs. Weinmiller, her hands clenched with anger. Alma. If ever I hear you say such a thing again, if ever you dare to repeat such a thing in my presence or anybody else's, then it will be the last straw. You understand me? Yes, you understand me. You act like a child, but you have the devil in you. And God will punish you. Yes, I'll punish you too. I'll take your cigarettes from you and give you no more. I'll give you no ice cream either. Because I'm tired of your malice. Yes, I'm tired of your malice and your self-indulgence. People wonder why I'm tied down here. They pity me. Think of me as an old maid already in spite of... I'm young. Still young. It's you. It's you. You've taken my youth away from me. I wouldn't say that. I'd try not to even think it. If you were just kind, just simple. But I could spread my life out like a rug for you to step on, and you'd step on it and not even say thank you, Alma, which is what you've done always. And now you dare to tell a disgusting lie about me in front of that girl? Mrs. Weinmiller, don't you think I hear you go to the window at night to watch him come in and... Alma, give me that plumed hat, Mother. It goes back now. It goes back. Mrs. Weinmiller, fight. Fight. Alma snatches at the plumed hat. Mrs. Weinmiller snatches too. The hat is torn between them. Mrs. Weinmiller retains the hat. The plume comes loose in Alma's hand. She stares at it a moment with a shocked expression. Alma, sincerely, Heaven have mercy upon us. Scene 3. Inside the rectory. The meeting is in progress, having just opened with the reading of the minutes by Alma. She stands before the green plush sofa and the others. This group includes Mr. Dormus, Vernon, a willowy younger man with an open collar and Byronic locks, the widow Bassett, and a wistful older girl with a long neck and thick-lensed glasses. Alma, reading. Our last meeting, which fell on July 14th, Mrs. Bassett. Bastille Day. Alma, pardon? Mrs. Bassett. It fell on Bastille Day. But, honey, that was the meeting before last. Alma. You're perfectly right. I seem to be on the wrong page. She drops the paper. Mrs. Bassett. Butterfingers? Alma. Here we are. July 25th. Correct? Mrs. Bassett. Correct. A little ripple of laughter goes about the circle. Alma, continuing. It was debated whether or not we ought to suspend operations for the remainder of the summer, as the departure of several members engaged in the teaching profession for their summer vacations. Mrs. Bassett, lucky people. Alma, had substantially contracted our little circle. Mrs. Bassett, decimated our ranks. There's another ripple of laughter. John appears outside the door frame and rings the bell. Alma, with agitation. Is that the doorbell? Mrs. Bassett. It sure did sound like it to me. Alma. Excuse me a moment. I think it may be. She crosses to the door frame and makes the gesture of opening the door. John steps in, immaculately groomed and shining his white linen coat over his arm and a white Panama hat in his hand. He is a startling contrast to the other male company who seem to be the outcasts of a state in which he is a prominent citizen. Alma, shrilly. Yes, it is. Our guest of honor. Everybody, this is Dr. John Buchanan, Jr. John, easily glancing about the assemblage. Hello, everybody. Mrs. Bassett. I never thought he'd show up. Congratulations, Miss Alma. John, did I miss much? Alma, not a thing. Just the minutes. I'll put you on the sofa next to me. She laughs breathlessly and makes an uncertain gesture. He settles gingerly on the sofa. They all stare at him with a curious sort of greediness. Well now, we are completely assembled. Mrs. Bassett, eagerly. Vernon has his verse play with him tonight. Alma, uneasily. Is that right, Vernon? Obviously it is. Vernon has a pile of papers 8 inches thick on his knees. He raises them timidly with downcast eyes. Roger, quickly. We decided to put that off till cooler weather. Miss Rosemary is supposed to read us a paper tonight on William Blake. Mrs. Bassett. Those dead poets can keep. John laughs. Alma excitedly jumping up. Mrs. Bassett, everybody. This is the way I feel about the verse play. It's too important a thing to read under any but ideal circumstances. Not only atmospheric, on some cool evening with music planned to go with it, but everyone present so that nobody will miss it. Why don't we take a standing vote on the matter? Alma. Good, perfect. Roger. All in favor of putting the verse play off till cooler weather, stand up. Everybody rises but Rosemary and Mrs. Bassett. Rosemary starts vaguely to rise, but Mrs. Bassett jerks her arm. Rosemary, was this a vote? Roger. Now, Mrs. Bassett, no rough tactics, please. Alma, has everybody got fans? John, you haven't got one? She looks about for a fan for him. Not seeing one, she takes Roger's out of his hand and gives it to John. Roger is nonplussed. Rosemary gets up with her paper. Rosemary. The poet, William Blake. Mrs. Bassett. Insane. Insane, that man was a mad fanatic. She squints her eyes tight shut and thrusts her thumbs into her ears. The reactions range from indignant to conciliatory. Roger. Now, Mrs. Bassett. Mrs. Bassett. This is a free country. I can speak my opinion, and I have read up on him. Go on, Rosemary. I wasn't criticizing your paper. But Rosemary sits down, hurt. Alma. Mrs. Bassett is only joking, Rosemary. Rosemary. No, I don't want to read it if she feels that strongly about it. Mrs. Bassett. Not a bit. Don't be silly. I just don't see why we should encourage the writings of people like that who have already gone into a drunkard's grave. Various voices exclaiming, Did he? I never heard that about him. Is that true? Alma. Mrs. Bassett is mistaken about that. Mrs. Bassett, you have confused Blake with someone else. Mrs. Bassett positively. Oh no, don't tell me. I've read up on him and I know what I'm talking about. He traveled around with the Frenchman who took a shot at him and landed them both in jail. Brussels. Brussels. Roger gaily. Brussels sprouts? Mrs. Bassett. That's where it happened. Fired a gun at him in a drunken stupor, and later one of them died of TB in the gutter. All right, I'm finished. I won't say anything more. Go on with your paper, Rosemary. There's nothing like contact with culture. Alma gets up. Alma. Before Rosemary reads her paper on Blake, I think it would be a good idea, since some of us aren't acquainted with his work, to preface the critical and biographical comments with a reading of one of his loveliest lyric poems. Rosemary. I'm not going to read anything at all. Not I. Alma. Then let me read it then. She takes the paper from Rosemary. This is called Love's Secret. She clears her throat and waits for a hush to settle. Rosemary looks stonily at the carpet. Mrs. Bassett looks at the ceiling. John coughs. Never seek to tell thy love, love that never told can be. For the gentle wind doth move, silently, invisibly. I told my love, I told my love, I told him all my heart. Trembling, cold in ghastly fear, did my love depart. No sooner had he gone from me, than a stranger passing by, silently, invisibly, took him with a sigh. There are various effusions and enthusiastic applause. Mrs. Bassett. Honey, you're right. That isn't the man I meant. I was thinking about the one who wrote about the bought red lips. Who was it that wrote about the bought red lips? John abruptly. He signals to Alma and points to his watch. He starts to leave. Alma springing up. John. John calling back. I have to call on a patient. Alma. Oh, John. She calls after him so sharply that the group is startled into silence. Rosemary interpreting this as a cue to read her paper. The poet William Blake was born in 1757. Alma suddenly rushes to the door and goes out after John. Roger. Of poor but honest parents. Mrs. Bassett. No supercilious comments out of you, sir. Go on, Rosemary. She speaks loudly. She has such a beautiful voice. Alma returns inside looking stunned. Alma. Please excuse the interruption, Rosemary. Dr. Buchanan had to call on a patient. Mrs. Bassett archly. I bet I know who the patient was. That Gonzalez girl whose father owns Moon Lake Casino and goes everywhere with 2 pistols strapped on his belt. Johnny Buchanan will get himself shot in that crowd. Alma. Why, Mrs. Bassett, what gave you such an idea? I don't think that John even knows that Gonzalez girl. Mrs. Bassett. He knows her all right. In the biblical sense of the word, if you'll excuse me. Alma. No, I will not excuse you. A thing like that is inexcusable. Mrs. Bassett. Have you fallen for him, Miss Alma? Miss Alma has fallen for the young doctor. They tell me he has lots of new lady patients. Alma. Stop it. She stamps her foot furiously and crushes the palm leaf fan between her clenched hands. I won't have malicious talk here. You drove him away from the meeting after I'd bragged so much about how bright and interesting you all were. You put your worst foot forward and simpered and chattered and carried on like idiots. Idiots! What am I saying? Please excuse me. She rushes out the inner door. Roger. I move that the meeting adjourn. Mrs. Bassett. I second the motion. Rosemary. I don't understand. What happened? Mrs. Bassett. Poor Miss Alma. Roger. She hasn't been herself lately. They all go out. After a moment, Alma re-enters with a tray of refreshments, looks about the deserted interior and bursts into hysterical laughter. The light dims out. Scene 4. In the doctor's office. John has a wound on his arm, which he is bandaging with Rosa's assistance. John. Hold that end. Wrap it around, pull it tight. There is a knock at the door. They look up silently. The knock is repeated. I better answer before they wake up the old man. He goes out. A few moments later, he returns, followed by Alma. He is rolling down his sleeve to conceal the bandage. Alma stops short at the sight of Rosa. Wait outside, Rosa, in the hall, but be quiet. Rosa gives Alma a challenging look as she withdraws from the lighted area. John explains about Rosa. A little emergency case. Alma. The patient you had to call on. John grins. I want to see your father. John. He's asleep. Anything I can do? Alma. No, I think not. I have to see your father. John. It's 2 a.m., Miss Alma. Alma. I know. I'm afraid I'll have to see him. John. What's the trouble? The voice of John's father is heard calling from above. Dr. Buchanan. John, what's going on down there? John at the door. Nothing much, Dad. Somebody got cut in a fight. Dr. Buchanan. I'm coming down. John. No, don't. Stay in bed. He rolls up his sleeve to show Alma the bandaged wound. She gasps and touches her lips. I've patched him up, Dad. You sleep. John executes the gesture of closing a door quietly on the hall. Alma. You've been in a brawl with that woman. John nods and rolls the sleeve back down. Alma sinks faintly into a chair. John. Is your doppelganger cutting up again? Alma. It's your father I want to talk to. John. Be reasonable, Miss Alma. You're not that sick. Alma. Do you suppose I would come here at 2 o'clock in the morning if I were not seriously ill? John. It's no telling what you would do in a state of hysteria. He puts some powders in a glass of water. Toss that down, Miss Alma. Alma. What is it? John. A couple of little white tablets dissolved in water. Alma. What kind of tablets? John. You don't trust me? Alma. You are not in any condition to inspire much confidence. John laughs softly. She looks at him helplessly for a moment, then bursts into tears. He draws up a chair beside hers and puts his arm gently about her shoulders. I seem to be all to pieces. John. The intellectual meeting wore you out. Alma. You made a quick escape from it. John. I don't like meetings. The only meetings I like are between two people. Alma. Such as between yourself and the lady outside? John. Or between you and me? Alma, nervously. Where is the... John. Oh, you've decided to take it? Alma. Yes, if you... She sips and chokes. He gives her his handkerchief. She touches her lips with it. John. Bitter? Alma. Awfully bitter. John. It'll make you sleepy. Alma. I do hope so. I wasn't able to sleep. John. And you felt panicky? Alma. Yes, I felt walled in. John. You started hearing your heart? Alma. Yes, like a drum. John. It scared you? Alma. It always does. John. Sure, I know. Alma. I don't think I will be able to get through this summer. The summer. John. You'll get through it, Miss Alma. Alma. How? John. One day will come after another, and one night will come after another, till sooner or later the summer will be all through with, and then it will be fall. And you will be saying, I don't see how I'm going to get through the fall. Alma. Oh. John. That's right. Draw a deep breath. Alma. Ah. John. Good. Now draw another. Alma. Ah. John. Better? Better? Alma. A little. John. Soon you'll be much better. He takes out a big silver watch and holds her wrist. Did you know that time is one side of the four-dimensional continuum we're caught in? Alma. What? John. Did you know space is curved? That it turns back onto itself like a soap bubble, adrift in something that's even less than space. He laughs a little as he replaces the watch. Rosa, faintly from outside. Johnny. John, looking up as if the cry came from there. Did you know that the Magellanic clouds are 100,000 light years away from the Earth? No? Alma shakes her head slightly. That's something to think about when you worry over your heart. That little red fist that's got to keep knocking against the big black door. Rosa, more distinctly. Johnny. She opens the door a crack. John. Cara de la boca. The door closes and he speaks to Alma. There's nothing wrong with your heart, but a little functional disturbance, like I told you before. You want me to check it? Alma nods mutely. John picks up his stethoscope. Alma. The lady outside, I hate to keep her waiting. John. Rosa doesn't mind waiting. Unbutton your blouse. Alma. Unbutton? John. The blouse. Alma. Hadn't I better come back in the morning when your father will be able to? John. Just as you please, Miss Alma. She hesitates, then begins to unbutton her blouse. Her fingers fumble. Fingers won't work? Alma, breathlessly. They're just as if frozen. John, smiling. Let me. He leans over her. Little pearl buttons. Alma. If your father discovered that woman in the house. John. He won't discover it. Alma. It would distress him terribly. John. Are you going to tell him? Alma. Certainly not. He laughs and applies the stethoscope to her chest. John. Breathe. Out. Breathe. Out. Alma. Ah. John. Alma. What do you hear? John. Just a little voice saying Miss Alma is lonesome. She rises and turns her back to him. Alma. If your idea of helping a patient is to ridicule and insult, John, my idea of helping you is to tell you the truth. Alma looks up at him. He lifts her hand from the chair arm. What is this stone? Alma. A topaz. John. Beautiful stone. Fingers still frozen? Alma, a little. He lifts her hand to his mouth and blows his breath on her fingers. John, I'm a poor excuse for a doctor. I'm much too selfish. But let's try to think about you. Alma, why should you bother to think about me? She sits down. John, you know I like you and I think you're worth a lot of consideration. Alma, why? John, because you have a lot of feeling in your heart. And that's a rare thing. It makes you too easily hurt. Did I hurt you tonight? Alma, you hurt me when you sprang up from the sofa and rushed from the rectory in such mad haste that you left your coat behind you. John, I'll pick up the coat sometime. Alma, the time of our last conversation you said you would take me riding in your automobile sometime, but you forgot to. John, I didn't forget. Many's the time I've looked across at the rectory and wondered if it would be worth trying, you and me. Alma, you decided it wasn't? John, I went there tonight, but it wasn't you and me. Fingers warm now? Alma, those tablets work quickly. I'm already feeling drowsy. She leans back with her eyes nearly shut. I'm beginning to feel almost like a water lily on a Chinese lagoon. A heavy iron bell strikes 3. Rosa. Johnny? Alma starts to rise. Alma, I must go. John, I will call for you Saturday night at 8 o'clock. Alma, what? John, I'll give you this box of tablets, but watch how you take them. Never more than 1 or 2 at a time. Alma, didn't you say something else a moment ago? John, I said I would call for you at the rectory Saturday night. Alma, oh. John, is that all right? Alma nods speechlessly. She remains with the box resting in the palm of her hand as if not knowing it was there. John gently closes her fingers on the box. Alma, oh. She laughs faintly. Rosa, outside. Johnny! John, do you think you can find your way home, Miss Alma? Rosa steps back into the office with a challenging look. Alma catches her breath sharply and goes out the side door. Johnny reaches above him and turns out the light. He crosses to Rosa by the anatomy chart and takes her roughly in his arms. The light lingers on the chart as the interior dims out. Scene 5. In the rectory. The light comes up, a soprano voice is heard singing from the land of the sky blue waters. As the curtain rises, Alma gets up from the piano. Mr. and Mrs. Weinmiller also are in the lighted room. Alma, what time is it, Father? He goes on writing. She raises her voice. What time is it, Father? Mr. Weinmiller, 5 of 8. I'm working on my sermon. Alma, why don't you work in the study? Mr. Weinmiller, the study is suffocating, so don't disturb me. Alma, would there be any chance of getting Mother upstairs if someone should call? Mr. Weinmiller, are you expecting a caller? Alma, not expecting, there's just a chance of it. Mr. Weinmiller, whom are you expecting? Alma, I said I wasn't expecting anyone, that there was just a possibility. Mr. Weinmiller, Mr. Dormus? I thought that this was his evening with his mother. Alma, yes, it is his evening with his mother. Mr. Weinmiller, then who is coming here, Alma? Alma, probably no one. Probably no one at all. Mr. Weinmiller, this is all very mysterious. Mrs. Weinmiller, that tall boy next door is coming to see her. That's who's coming to see her. Alma, if you will go upstairs, Mother, I'll call the drugstore and ask them to deliver a pint of fresh peach ice cream. Mrs. Weinmiller, I'll go upstairs when I'm ready. Good and ready, and you can put that in your pipe and smoke it, Miss Weinmiller. She lights a cigarette. Mr. Weinmiller turned slowly away with a profound sigh. Alma, I may as well tell you who might call, so that if he calls, there will not be any unpleasantness about it. Young Dr. John Buchanan said he might call. Mrs. Weinmiller. See? Mr. Weinmiller. You can't be serious. Mrs. Weinmiller. Didn't I tell you? Alma. Well, I am. Mr. Weinmiller. That young man might come here? Alma. He asked me if he might, and I said yes, if he'd wished to. But it is now after 8, so it doesn't look like he's coming. Mr. Weinmiller. If he does come, you will go upstairs to your room, and I will receive him. Alma. If he does come, I'll do no such thing, Father. Mr. Weinmiller. You must be out of your mind. Alma. I'll receive him myself. You may retire to your study and mother upstairs, but if he comes, I'll receive him. I don't judge people by the tongues of gossips. I happen to know that he has been grossly misjudged and misrepresented by old busybodies who are envious of his youth and brilliance and charm. Mr. Weinmiller. If you're not out of your senses, then I'm out of mine. Alma. I dare say we're all a bit peculiar, Father. Mr. Weinmiller. Well, I have had one almost insufferable cross to bear, and perhaps I can bear another. But if you think I'm retiring into my study when this young man comes, probably with a whiskey bottle in one hand and a pair of dice in the other, you have another think coming. I'll sit right here and look at him until he leaves. He turns back to his sermon. A whistle is heard outside the open door. Alma, speaking quickly. As a matter of fact, I think I'll walk down to the drugstore and call for the ice cream myself. She crosses to the door, snatching up her hat, gloves, and veil. Mrs. Weinmiller. There she goes to him. Ha-ha. Alma rushes out. Mr. Weinmiller, looking up. Alma! Alma! Mrs. Weinmiller. Ha-ha-ha! Mr. Weinmiller. Where is Alma? Alma! He rushes through the door. Alma! Mrs. Weinmiller. Ha-ha! Who got fooled? Who got fooled? Insufferable cross yourself, you old windbag. The curtain comes down. Scene 6. A delicately suggested arbor enclosing a table and 2 chairs. Over the table is suspended a torn paper lantern. This tiny set may be placed way downstage in front of the 2 interiors, which should be darkened out, as in the fountain scenes. In the background, as it is throughout the play, the angel of the fountain is dimly visible. Music from the nearby pavilion of the casino can be used when suitable for background. John's voice is audible before he and Alma enter. John from the darkness. I don't understand why we can't go in the casino. Alma. You do understand. You're just pretending not to. John. Give me one reason. Alma, coming into the arbor. I'm a minister's daughter. John. That's no reason. He follows her in. He wears a white linen suit, carrying the coat over his arm. Alma. You're a doctor. That's a better reason. You can't any more afford to be seen in such places than I can. Less. John, bellowing. Dusty. Dusty from the darkness. Coming. John. What are you fishing in that pocketbook for? Alma. Nothing. John. What have you got there? Alma. Let go. John. Those sleeping tablets I gave you? Alma. Yes. John. What for? Alma. I need one. John. Now? Alma. Yes. John. Why? Alma. Why? Because I nearly died of heart failure in your automobile. What possessed you to drive like that? A demon? Dusty enters. John. A bottle of Rosso. Dusty. Sure. He withdraws. John. Hey, tell Shorty I want to hear the Yellow Dog Blues. Alma. Please give me back my tablets. John. You want to turn into a dope fiend taking this stuff? I said take one when you need one. Alma. I need one now. John. Sit down and stop swallowing air. Dusty returns with a tall wine bottle and 2 thin-stemmed glasses. When does the cockfight start? Dusty. About 10 o'clock, Dr. Johnny. Alma. What does the what start? John. They have a cockfight here every Saturday night. Ever seen one? Alma. Perhaps in some earlier incarnation of mine. John. When you wore a brass ring in your nose? Alma. Then maybe I went to exhibitions like that. John. You're going to see one tonight. Alma. Oh, no, I'm not. John. That's what we came here for. Alma. I didn't think such exhibitions were legal. John. This is Moonlight Casino where anything goes. Alma. And you're a frequent patron? John. I'd say constant. Alma. Then I'm afraid you must be serious about giving up your medical career. John. You bet I am. A doctor's life is walled in by sickness and misery and death. Alma. May I be so presumptuous as to inquire what you'll do when you quit? John. You may be so presumptuous as to inquire. Alma. But you won't tell me. John. I haven't made up my mind, but I've been thinking of South America lately. Alma, sadly. Oh. John. I've heard that cantinas are lots more fun than saloons, and senoritas are caviar among females. Alma. Dorothy Sykes's brother went to South America and was never heard of again. It takes a strong character to survive in the tropics. Otherwise, it's a quagmire. John. You think my character's weak? Alma. I think you're confused. Just awfully, awfully confused. As confused as I am, but in a different way. John, stretching out his legs. Hee-haw, ho-hum. Alma. You used to say that as a child to signify your disgust. John, grinning. Did I? Alma, sharply. Don't sit like that. John. Why not? Alma. You look so indolent and worthless. John. Maybe I am. Alma. If you must go somewhere, why don't you choose a place with a bracing climate? John. Parts of South America are as cool as a cucumber. Alma. I never knew that. John. Well, now you do. Alma. Those Latins all dream in the sun and indulge in their senses. John. Well, it's yet to be proven that anyone on this earth is crowned with so much glory as the one that uses his senses to get all he can in the way of satisfaction. Alma. Self-satisfaction? John. What other kind is there? Alma. I will answer that question by asking you one. Have you ever seen or looked at a picture of a Gothic cathedral? John. Gothic cathedrals? What about them? Alma. How everything reaches up. How everything seems to be straining for something out of reach of stone or human fingers. The immense stained windows, the great arched doors that are 5 or 6 times the height of the tallest man, the vaulted ceiling and all the delicate spires, all reaching up to something beyond attainment. To me, well, that is the secret, the principle back of existence, the everlasting struggle and aspiration for more than our human limits have placed in our reach. Who was that said that, oh, so beautiful thing? All of us are in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. John. Mr. Oscar Wilde. Alma, somewhat taken aback. Well, regardless of who said it, it's still true. Some of us are looking at the stars. She looks up raptly and places her hand over his. John. It's no fun holding hands with gloves on, Miss Alma. Alma. That's easily remedied. I'll just take the gloves off. Music is heard. John. Christ! He rises abruptly and lights a cigarette. Rosa Gonzalez is dancing in the casino. Alma. You are unhappy. You hate me for depriving you of the company inside. Well, you'll escape by and by. You'll drive me home and come back out by yourself. I've only got out with 3 young men at all seriously, and with each one there was a desert between us. John. What do you mean by a desert? Alma. Oh, wide stretches of uninhabitable ground. John. Maybe you made it that way by being standoffish. Alma. I made quite an effort with one or two of them. John. What kind of an effort? Alma. Oh, I tried to entertain them the first few times. I would play and sing for them in the rectory parlor. John. With your father in the next room and the door half open? Alma. I don't think that was the trouble. John. What was the trouble? Alma. I didn't have my heart in it. She laughs uncertainly. A silence would fall between us. You know a silence? John. Yes, I know a silence. Alma. I'd try to talk and he'd try to talk and neither would make a go of it. John. The silence would fall? Alma. Yes, the enormous silence. John. Then you'd go back to the piano? Alma. I'd twist my ring. Sometimes I twisted it so hard that the band cut my finger. He'd glance at us both know that the useless undertaking had come to a close. John. You'd call it quits? Alma. Quits is what we'd call it. One or two times I was rather sorry about it. John. But you didn't have your heart in it? Alma. None of them really engaged in my serious feelings. John. You do have serious feelings of that kind? Alma. Doesn't everyone sometimes? John. Some women are cold. Some women are what is called frigid. Alma. Do I give that impression? John. Under the surface you have a lot of excitement, a great deal more than any other woman I have met. So much that you have to carry these sleeping pills with you. The question is why? He leans over and lifts her veil. Alma. What are you doing that for? John. So that I won't get your veil in my mouth when I kiss you. Alma faintly. Do you want to do that? John gently. Miss Alma. He takes her arms and draws her to her feet. Oh, Miss Alma, Miss Alma. He kisses her. Alma, in a low, shaken voice. Not Miss anymore, just Alma. John grinning gently. Miss suits you better, Miss Alma. He kisses her again. She hesitantly touches his shoulders, but not quite to push him away. John speaks softly to her. Is it so hard to forget you're a preacher's daughter? Alma. There is no reason for me to forget that I am a minister's daughter. A minister's daughter is no different from any other young lady who tries to remember that she is a lady. John. This lady stuff, is that so important? Alma. Not to the sort of girls that you may be used to bringing to Moonlake Casino. But suppose that someday she crosses out of the arbor and faces away from him. Suppose that someday you married the woman that you selected to be your wife, and not only your wife, but the mother of your children. She catches her breath at the thought. Wouldn't you want that woman to be a lady? Wouldn't you want her to be somebody that you as her husband and they as her precious children could look up to with very deep respect? There is a pause. John. There's other things between a man and a woman besides respect. Did you know that, Miss Alma? Alma. Yes. John. There's such a thing as intimate relations. Alma. Thank you for telling me that so plainly. John. It may strike you as unpleasant, but it does have a good deal to do with connubial felicity, as you'd call it. There are some women that just give in to a man as a sort of obligation imposed on them by the cruelty of nature. He finishes his glass and pours another. And there you are, Alma. There I am? John. I'm speaking generally. Alma. Oh. Hoarse shouts go up from the casino. John. The cockfight has started. Alma. Since you have spoken so plainly, I'll speak plainly too. There are some women who turn a possibly beautiful thing into something no better than the coupling of beasts. But love is what you bring to it. John. You're right about that. Alma. Some people just bring their bodies. But there are some women, John, who can bring their hearts to it also, who can bring their souls to it. John derisively. Souls again, huh? Those Gothic cathedrals you dream of? There's another hoarse, prolonged shout from the casino. Your name is Alma, and Alma is Spanish for soul. Sometime I'd like to show you a chart of the human anatomy that I have in the office. It shows what our insides are like, and maybe you can show me where the beautiful soul is located on the chart. He drains the wine bottle. Let's go watch the cockfight. Alma. No. There is a pause. John. I know something else we could do. There are rooms above the casino. Alma, her back stiffening. I'd heard that you made suggestions like that to girls that you go out with, but I refused to believe such stories were true. What made you think I might be amenable to such a suggestion? John. I counted your pulse in the office the night you ran out because you weren't able to sleep. Alma. The night I was ill and went to your father for help. John. It was me you went to. Alma. It was your father and you wouldn't call your father. John. Fingers frozen stiff when Alma, rising. Oh, I want to go home, but I won't go with you. I will go in a taxi. She wheels about hysterically. Boy, call a taxi. John, I'll call one for you, Miss Alma. Taxi. He goes out of the arbor. Alma, wildly. You're not a gentleman. John, from the darkness. Taxi. Alma, you're not a gentleman. As he disappears, she makes a sound in her throat like a hurt animal. The light fades out of the arbor and comes up more distinctly on the stone angel of the fountain. Part 2. A Winter. Scene 7. The sky and the southern constellations, almost imperceptibly moving with the earth's motion, appear on the great cyclorama. The rectory interior is lighted first, disclosing Alma and Roger Dormus seated on the green plush sofa under the romantic landscape and its heavy gilt frame. On a tiny table beside them is a cut glass pitcher of lemonade with cherries and orange slices in it, like a little aquarium of tropical fish. Roger is entertaining Alma with a collection of photographs and postcards, mementos of his mother's trip to the Orient. He is enthusiastic about them and describes them in phrases his mother must have assumed from a sedulous study of literature provided by Cook's tours. Alma is less enthusiastic. She is preoccupied with the sounds of a wild party going on next door at the doctor's home. At present, there is Mexican music with shouts and stamping. Only the immediate area of the sofa is clearly lighted. The fountain is faintly etched in light, and the night sky walls the interior. Roger. And this is Ceylon, the Pearl of the Orient. Alma. And who is this fat young lady? Roger. That is mother in a hunting costume. Alma. The hunting costume makes her figure seem bulky. What was your mother hunting? Roger, gaily. Heaven knows what she was hunting, but she found Papa. Alma. Oh, she met your father on this Oriental tour? Roger. Yes. He was returning from India with dysentery, and they met on the boat. Alma, distastefully. Oh. Roger. And here she is on top of a ruined temple. Alma. How did she get up there? Roger. Climbed up, I suppose? Alma. What an active woman. Roger. Oh yes, active is no word for it. Here she is on an elephant's back in Burma. Alma. Ah. Roger, you're looking at it upside down, Miss Alma. Alma, deliberately, to tease you. The doorbell rings. Perhaps that's your mother coming to fetch you home. Roger, it's only 10:15. I never leave till 10:30. Mrs. Bassett comes in. Alma, Mrs. Bassett. Mrs. Bassett. I was just wondering who I could turn to when I saw the rectory light, and I thought to myself, Grace Bassett, you trot yourself right over there and talk to Mr. Winemiller. Alma. Father has retired. Mrs. Bassett. Oh, what a pity. She sees Roger. Hello, Roger. I saw that fall your mother took this morning. I saw her come skipping out of the Delta Planters Bank, and I thought to myself, now isn't that remarkable? A woman of her age and weight so light on her feet? And just at that very moment, down she went. I swear to goodness, I thought she had broken her hip. Was she bruised much? Roger, just shaken up, Mrs. Bassett. Mrs. Bassett, oh, how lucky. She certainly must be made out of India rubber. She turns to Alma. Alma, if it is not too late for human intervention, your father's the one right person to call up old Dr. Buchanan at the fever clinic at Lyon and let him know. Alma. About what? Mrs. Bassett. You must be stone deaf if you haven't noticed what's going on next door since the old doctor left to fight the epidemic. One continual orgy. Well, not 5 minutes ago, a friend of mine who works at the county courthouse called to inform me that young Dr. John and Rosa Gonzalez have taken a license out and are going to be married tomorrow. Alma. Are you quite certain? Mrs. Bassett. Certain? I'm always certain before I speak. Alma. Why would he do such a thing? Mrs. Bassett. August madness. They say it has something to do with the falling stars. Of course, it might also have something to do with the fact that he lost $2,000 or $3,000 at the casino, which he can't pay except by giving himself to Gonzalez's daughter. She turns to Alma. Alma, what are you doing with that picture puzzle? Alma, with a faint hysterical laugh. The pieces don't fit. Mrs. Bassett to Roger. I shouldn't have opened my mouth. Alma. Will both of you please go? Roger goes out. Mrs. Bassett. I knew this was going to upset you. Good night, Alma. She leaves. Alma suddenly springs up and seizes the telephone. Alma. Long distance. Please get me the fever clinic at Lyon. I want to speak to Dr. Buchanan. The light in the rectory dims out and light comes on in the doctor's office. Rosa's voice is heard calling. Rosa. Johnny. The offstage calling of John's name is used throughout the play as a cut for theme music. John enters the office interior. He is dressed, as always, in a white linen suit. His face has a look of satiety and confusion. He throws himself down in a swivel chair at the desk. Rosa Gonzalez comes in. She is dressed in a flamenco costume and has been dancing. She crosses and stands before the anatomy chart and clicks her castanets to catch his attention, but he remains looking up at the roofless dark. She approaches him. Rosa, you have blood on your face. John, you bit my ear. Rosa, oh. She approaches him with exaggerated concern. John, you never make love without scratching or biting or something. Whenever I leave you, I have a little blood on me. Why is that? Rosa, because I know I can't hold you. John, I think you're doing a pretty good job of it. Better than anyone else. Tomorrow we leave here together, and Father or somebody else can tell old Mrs. Arbuckle her 85 years are enough and she's got to go now on the wings of carcinoma. Dance, Rosa. Accordion music is heard. She performs a slow and joyless dance around his chair. John continues while she dances. Tomorrow we leave here together. We sail out of Galveston, don't we? Rosa. You say it, but I don't believe it. John. I have the tickets. Rosa. 2 pieces of paper that you can tear in 2. John. We'll go all right and live on fat remittances from your papa. Ha ha. Rosa. Ha ha ha. John. Not long ago the idea would have disgusted me, but not now. He catches her by the wrist. Rosa. Rosa Gonzalez. Did anyone ever slide downhill as fast as I have this summer? Like a greased pig. And yet every evening I put on a clean white suit. I have a dozen. 6 in the closet and 6 in the wash. And there isn't a sign of depravity in my face. And yet all summer I've sat around here like this, remembering last night, anticipating the next one. The trouble with me is I should have been castrated. He flings his wine glass at the anatomy chart. She stops dancing. Dance, Rosa. Why don't you dance? Rosa shakes her head dumbly. What is the matter, Rosa? Why don't you go on dancing? The accordion continues. He thrusts her arm savagely over her head in the flamenco position. Rosa, suddenly weeping. I can't dance anymore. She throws herself to the floor, pressing her weeping face to his knees. The voice of her father is heard, bellowing in the next room. Gonzalez. The sky is the limit. John is sobered. John. What does your father want me for a son-in-law? Rosa, sobbing. I want you. I want you. John, raising her from the floor. Why do you? Rosa, clinging to him. Maybe because I was born in Piedras Negras and grew up in a one-room house with a dirt floor, and all of us had to sleep in that one room, 5 Mexicans and 3 geese and a little gamecock named Pepe. She laughs hysterically. Pepe was a good fighter. That's how Papa began to make money, winning bets on Pepe. We all slept in one room, and in the night I would hear the love-making. Papa would grunt like a pig to show his passion. I thought to myself how dirty it was, love-making, and how dirty it was to be Mexicans and all have to be sleep in one room with a dirt floor and not smell good because there was not any bathtub. The accordion continues. John. What does that have to do with Rosa? Me wanting you? You're tall. You smell good. I know I'm so glad that you never grunt like a pig to show your passion. She embraces him convulsively. But quien sabe? Something might happen tonight and I'll wind up with some dark little friend of Papa's. Gonzalez imperiously. Rosa, Rosa. Rosa. Sí, papi. Aquí estoy. Gonzalez, entering unsteadily. The gold beads. He fingers a necklace of gold beads that Rosa is wearing. Johnny. He staggers up to John and catches him in a drunken embrace. Listen, when my girl Rosa was little, she'd see a string of gold bead and she want those gold beads so bad that she'll cry all night for it. I don't have money to buy a string of gold beads, so next day I go for a ride up to Eagle Pass and I walk in a dry goods store and I say to the man, please give me a string of gold bead. He say, show me the money. And I say, here is the money. And I reach down to my belt and I pull out, not the money, but this. He pulls out a revolver. Now I have money, but I still have this. Laughing. She got the gold bead. Anything that she want, I get for her with this. He pulls out a roll of bills. Or this. He waves the revolver. John, pushing Gonzalez away. Keep your stinking breath out of my face, Gonzalez. Rosa. Déjalo, Papa. Gonzalez moving unsteadily to the couch with Rosa supporting him. Le doy la tierra y si la tierra no basta, le doy el cielo. He collapses onto the couch. The sky is the limit. Rosa to John. Let him stay there. Come on back to the party. Rosa leaves the room. John goes over to the window facing the rectory and looks across. The light comes up in the rectory living room as Alma enters, dressed in a robe. She goes to the window and looks across at the doctor's house. As Alma and John stand at the windows looking toward each other through the darkness, music is heard. Slowly, as if drawn by the music, John walks out of his house and crosses over to the rectory. Alma remains motionless at the window until John enters the room behind her. The music dies away and there is a murmur of wind. She slowly turns to face John. John. I took the door open for an invitation. The Gulf wind is blowing tonight. Cools things off a little. But my head's on fire. Alma says nothing. John moves a few steps toward her. The silence. Alma sinks onto the love seat, closing her eyes. Yes, the enormous silence. He goes over to her. I will go in a minute, but first I want you to put your hands on my face. He crouches beside her. Eternity and Miss Alma have such cool hands. He buries his face in her lap. The attitude suggests a stone pieta. Alma's eyes remain closed. On the other side of the stage, Dr. Buchanan enters his house, and the light builds a little as he looks around in the door of his office. The love theme music fades out, and the Mexican music comes up strongly with a definitely ominous quality as Rosa enters the office from the other side. Rosa. Johnny. She catches sight of Dr. Buchanan and checks herself in surprise. Oh, I thought you were Johnny. But you are Johnny's father. I am Rosa Gonzalez. Dr. Buchanan. I know who you are. What's going on in my house? Rosa, nervously. John's giving a party because we're leaving tomorrow. Defiantly. Yes, together. I hope you like the idea. But if you don't, it don't matter because we like the idea and my father likes the idea. Gonzalez, drunkenly sitting up on the couch. The sky is the limit. Dr. Buchanan slowly raising his silver-headed cane in a threatening gesture. Dr. Buchanan. Get your swine out of my house. He strikes Gonzalez with his cane. Gonzalez staggering up from the couch in pain and surprise. Rosa breathlessly backing against the chart of anatomy. No, Papa. Dr. Buchanan striking at the chest of the bull-like man with his cane. Get your swine out, I said. Get them out of my house. He repeats the blow. The drunken Mexican roars with pain and surprise. He backs up and reaches under his coat. Rosa, wildly and despairingly, No. She covers her face against the chart of anatomy. A revolver is fired. There is a burst of light. The cane drops. The music stops short. Everything dims out but a spot of light on Rosa standing against the chart of anatomy with closed eyes, and her face twisted like that of a tragic mask. Rosa, senselessly. The theme music is started faintly, and the light disappears from everything but the wings of the stone angel. Scene 8. The doctor's office. The stone angel is dimly visible above. John is seated in a hunched position at the table. Alma enters with a coffee tray. The sounds of prayer come through the inner door. John. What is that mumbo-jumbo your father is spouting in there? Alma. A prayer? John. Tell him to quit. We don't want that worn-out magic. Alma. You may not want it, but it's not a question of what you want anymore. I've made you some coffee. John. I don't want any. Alma. Lean back and let me wash your face off, John. She presses a towel to the red marks on his face. Such a fine face. A fine and sensitive face. A face that has power in it that shouldn't be wasted. John. Never mind that. He pushes her hand away. Alma. You have to go in to see him. John. I couldn't. He wouldn't want me. Alma, this happened because of his devotion to you. John, it happened because some meddlesome Maddie called him back here tonight. Who was it did that? Alma, I did. John, it was you then. It was you then. Alma, I found him at the fever clinic in Lyon as soon as I learned what you were planning to do. I wired him to come here and stop it. John, you brought him here to be shot. Alma, you can't put the blame on anything but your weakness. John, you call me weak? Alma, sometimes it takes a tragedy like this to make a weak person strong. John, you, white-blooded spinster. You so right people, pious, pompous mumblers, preachers and preachers' daughter, all muffled up in a lot of worn-out magic. And I was supposed to minister to your neuroses, give you tablets for your sleeping and Tonys to give you the strength to go on mumbling your worn-out mumbo-jumbo? Alma, call me whatever you want, but don't let your father hear you're drunk and shouting. She tries to break away from him. John, stay here. I want you to look at something. He turns her about. This chart of anatomy, look. Alma, I've seen it before. She turns away. John, you never dared to look at it. Alma, why should I? John, you're scared to. Alma, you must be out of your senses. John, you talk about weakness but can't even look at a picture of human insides. Alma, they're not important. John, that's your mistake. You think you're stuffed with rose leaves. Turn around and look at it. It may do you good. Alma, how can you behave like this with your father dying and you so... John, hold still. Alma, so much to blame for it. John, no more than you are. Alma, at least for this little while. John, look here. Alma, you could feel some shame. John, with crazy grinning intensity. Now listen here to the anatomy lecture. This upper story is the brain, which is hungry for something called truth and doesn't get much, but keeps on feeling hungry. This middle's the belly, which is hungry for food. This part down here is the sex, which is hungry for love because it is sometimes lonesome. I fed all three as I could, or as much as I wanted. You fed none. Nothing. Well, maybe your belly a little, watery substance. But love or truth, nothing. But nothing but hand-me-down notions, attitudes, poses. He releases her. Now you can go. The anatomy lecture is over. Alma. So that is your high conception of human desires. What you have here is not the anatomy of a beast, but a man. And I reject your opinion of where love is and the kind of truth you believe the brain to be seeking. There is something not shown on the chart. John, you mean the part that Alma is Spanish for, do you? Alma, yes. That's not shown on the anatomy chart. But it's there, just the same. Yes, there. Somewhere not seen, but there. And it's that I loved you with. That. Not what you mention. Yes, did love you with, John. Nearly did when you hurt me. He turns slowly to her and speaks gently. John, I wouldn't have made love to you. Alma, uncomprehendingly. What? John, the night at the casino. I wouldn't have made love to you. Even if you had consented to go upstairs, I couldn't have made love to you. She stares at him as if anticipating some unbearable hurt. Yes. Yes, isn't that funny? I'm more afraid of your soul than you are afraid of my body. You'd have been as safe as the angel of the fountain, because I wouldn't feel decent enough to touch you. Mr. Weinmiller comes in. Mr. Weinmiller. He's resting more easily now. Alma. She nods her head. John reaches for his coffee cup. It's cold. I'll heat it. John, it's all right. Mr. Weinmiller. Alma, Dr. John wants you. Alma. I, I, Mr. Weinmiller. He asked if you would sing for him. Alma. I couldn't now. John, go in and sing to him, Miss Alma. Mr. Weinmiller withdraws through the outer door. Alma looks back at John, hunched over the coffee cup. He doesn't return her look. She passes into the blurred orange space beyond the inner door, leaving it slightly open. After a few minutes, her voice rises softly within, singing. John suddenly rises. He crosses to the door, shoves it slowly open, and enters. John, softly and with deep tenderness. Father? The light dims out in the house, but lingers on the stone angel. Scene 9. The cyclorama is the faint blue of a late afternoon in autumn. There is band music, a Sousa march in the distance. As it grows somewhat louder, Alma enters the rectory interior in a dressing gown and with her hair hanging loose. She looks as if she had been through a long illness, the intensity drained, her pale face listless. She crosses to the window frame, but the parade is not in sight, so she returns weakly to the sofa and sits down, closing her eyes with exhaustion. The Reverend and Mrs. Weinmiller enter the outer door frame of the rectory, a grotesque-looking couple. Mrs. Weinmiller has on her plumed hat at a rakish angle, and a brilliant scarf about her throat. Her face wears a roguish smile that suggests a musical comedy pirate. One hand holds the minister's arm, and with the other she is holding an ice cream cone. Mr. Weinmiller. Now you may let go of my arm, if you please. She was on her worst behavior, stopped in front of the White Star Pharmacy on Front Street and stood there like a mule. Wouldn't budge till I bought her an ice cream cone. I had it wrapped in tissue paper because she had promised me she wouldn't eat it until we got home. The moment I gave it to her, she tore off the paper and walked home licking it every step of the way, just to humiliate me. Mrs. Weinmiller offers him the half-eaten cone, saying, Lick? Mr. Weinmiller, no, thank you. Alma, now, children. Mr. Weinmiller's irritation shifts to Alma. Mr. Weinmiller, Alma, why don't you get dressed? It hurts me to see you sitting around like this day in, day out like an invalid when there is nothing particularly wrong with you. I can't read your mind. You may have had some kind of disappointment, but you must not make it an excuse for acting as if the world had come to an end. Alma, I've made the beds and washed the breakfast dishes and phoned to the market and sent the laundry out and peeled the potatoes and shelled the peas and set the table for lunch. What more do you want? Mr. Weinmiller sharply. I want you to either get dressed or stay in your room. Alma rises indifferently. Then her father speaks suddenly. At night you get dressed, don't you? Yes, I heard you slipping out of the house at 2 a.m, and that was not the first time. Alma, I don't sleep well. Sometimes I have to get up and walk for a while before I'm able to sleep. Mr. Weinmiller, what am I going to tell people who ask about you? Alma, tell them I've changed and you're waiting to see in what way. The band music becomes a little louder. Mr. Weinmiller, are you going to stay like this indefinitely? Alma, not indefinitely, but you may wish that I had. Mr. Weinmiller, stop twisting that ring. Whenever I look at you, you're twisting that ring. Give me that ring. I'm going to take that ring off your finger. He catches her wrist. She breaks roughly away from him. Mrs. Weinmiller, joyfully, fight, fight. Mr. Weinmiller, oh, I give up. Alma, that's better. She suddenly crosses to the window as the band music gets louder. Is there a parade in town? Mrs. Weinmiller, yes, they met him at the station with a great big silver loving cup. Alma. Who? Who did they? Mrs. Weinmiller. That boy next door? The one you watched all the time? Alma. Is that true, Father? Mr. Weinmiller, unfolding his newspaper. Haven't you looked at the papers? Alma. No, not lately. Mr. Weinmiller, wiping his eyeglasses. These people are grasshoppers, just as likely to jump one way as another. He's finished the work his father started, stamped out the fever, and gotten all of the glory. Well, that's how it is in this world. Years of devotion and sacrifice are overlooked and forgotten while someone young and lucky walks off with the honors. Alma has crossed slowly to the window. The sun bright falls in a shaft through the frame. Alma suddenly crying out. There he is. She staggers away from the window. There is a roll of drums, and then silence. Alma now speaks faintly. What happened? Something struck me. Mr. Weinmiller catches her arm to support her. Mr. Weinmiller. Alma, I'll call a doctor. Alma. No, don't. Don't call anybody to help me. I want to die. She collapses on the sofa. The band strikes up again and recedes down the street. The rectory interior dims out. Then the light is brought up in the doctor's office. John enters with his loving cup. He is sprucely dressed, and his whole manner suggests a newfound responsibility. While he is setting the award on the table, removing his coat and starched collar, Nellie Ewell appears in the door behind him. She stands by the anatomy chart and watches him until he discovers her presence. Nellie has abruptly grown up and wears very adult clothes, but has lost none of her childish impudence and brightness. John gives a startled whistle as he sees her. Nellie giggles. John. High heels, feathers, and paint. Nellie. Not paint. John. Natural color? Nellie. Excitement. John. Over what? Nellie. Everything. You? You here? Didn't you see me at the depot? I shouted and waved my arm off. I'm home for Thanksgiving. John. From where? Nellie. Sophie Newcomb's? He remains staring at her, unbelieving. At last she draws a book from under her arm. Here's that nasty book you gave me last summer when I was pretending such ignorance of things. John. Only pretending? Nellie. Yes. He ignores the book. She tosses it on the table. Well? John laughs uneasily and sits on the table. Shall I go now, or will you look at my tongue? She crosses to him, sticking out her tongue. John. Red as a berry. Nellie. Peppermint drops. Will you have one? She holds out a sack. John. Thanks. Nellie giggles as he takes one. What's the joke, Nellie? Nellie. They make your mouth so sweet. John. So? Nellie. I always take one when I hope to be kissed. John, after a pause. Suppose I took you up on that. Nellie. I'm not scared. Are you? He gives her a quick kiss. She clings to him, raising her hand to press his head against her own. He breaks free after a moment and turns the light back on. John, considerably impressed. Where did you learn such tricks? Nellie. I've been away to school, but they didn't teach me to love. John. Who are you to be using that long word? Nellie. That isn't a long word. John. No. He turns away from her. Run along, Nellie, before we get into trouble. Nellie. Who's afraid of trouble? You or me? John. I am. Run along, hear me? Nellie. Oh, I'll go, but I'll be back for Christmas. She laughs and runs out. He whistles and wipes his forehead with a handkerchief. Scene 10. An afternoon in December. At the fountain in the park, it is very windy. Alma enters. She seems to move with an effort against the wind. She sinks down on the bench. A widow with a flowing black veil passes across the stage and pauses by Alma's bench. It is Mrs. Bassett. Mrs. Bassett. Hello, Alma. Alma. Good afternoon, Mrs. Bassett. Mrs. Bassett. Such wind, such wind. Alma. Yes, it nearly swept me off my feet. I had to sit down to catch my breath for a moment. Mrs. Bassett. I wouldn't sit too long if I were you. Alma. No, not long. Mrs. Bassett. It's good to see you out again after your illness. Alma. Thank you. Mrs. Bassett. Our poor little group broke up after you dropped out. Alma, insincerely. What a pity. Mrs. Bassett. You should have come to the last meeting. Alma. Why? What happened? Mrs. Bassett. Vernon read his verse play? Alma. Oh, how was it received? Mrs. Bassett. Maliciously, spitefully, and vindictively torn to pieces, the way children tear the wings off butterflies. I think next spring we might reorganize. She throws up her black-gloved hands in a deploring gesture. Nellie Yule appears. She is dressed very fashionably and carrying a fancy basket of Christmas packages. Nellie. Miss Alma. Mrs. Bassett rushing off. Goodbye. Alma. Why, Nellie. Nellie Yule. Nellie. I was by the rectory. Just popped in for a second. The holidays are so short that every minute is precious. They told me you'd gone to the park. Alma. This is the first walk I've taken in quite a while. Nellie. You've been ill. Alma. Not ill. Just not very well. How you, Nellie? Nellie. It's just my clothes. Since I went off to Sophie Newcomb, I picked out my own clothes, Miss Alma. When Mother had jurisdiction over my wardrobe, she tried to keep me looking like a child. Alma. Your voice has grown up too. Nellie. They're teaching me diction, Miss Alma. I'm learning to talk like you. Long A's and everything, such as can't or bath or laugh instead of laugh, laugh, can't, both, laugh. Yesterday I slipped. I said I laughed and laughed till I nearly died laughing. Johnny was so amused at me. Alma. Johnny? Nellie, you're next door neighbor. Alma. Oh, I'm sure it must be a very fashionable school. Nellie. Oh, yes, they're preparing us to be young ladies in society. What a pity there's no society here to be a young lady in. At least, not for me, with Mother's reputation. Alma. You'll find other fields to conquer. Nellie. What's this I hear about you? Alma. I have no idea, Nellie. Nellie. That you've quit teaching singing and gone into retirement? Alma. Naturally, I had to stop teaching while I was ill. And as for retiring from the world, it's more of a case of the world retiring from me. Nellie. I know somebody whose feelings you've hurt badly. Alma. Why, who could that be, Nellie? Nellie. Somebody who regards you as an angel? Alma. I can't think who might hold me in such esteem. Nellie. Somebody who says that you refused to see him? Alma. I saw nobody. For several months the long summer wore me out, so. Nellie. Well, anyhow, I'm going to give you your present. She hands her a small package from the basket. Alma. Nellie, you shouldn't have given me anything. Nellie. I'd like to know why not. Alma. I didn't expect it. Nellie. After all, after the trouble you took with my horrible voice? Alma. It's very sweet of you, Nellie. Nellie. Open it. Alma. Now. Nellie. Why, sure. Alma. It's so prettily wrapped, I hate to undo it. Nellie. I love to wrap presents, and since it was for you, I did a specially dainty job of it. Alma, winding the ribbon about her fingers. I'm going to save this ribbon. I'm going to keep this lovely paper, too, with the silver stars on it, and the sprig of holly. Nellie. Let me pin it on your jacket, Alma. Alma. Yes, do. I hardly realized that Christmas was coming. She unfolds the paper, revealing a lace handkerchief and a card. What an exquisite handkerchief. Nellie. I hate to give people handkerchiefs. It's so unimaginative. Alma. I love to get them. Nellie. It comes from Maison Blanche. Alma. Oh, does it really? Nellie. Smell it. Alma. Sachet roses. Well, I'm just more touched and pleased than I can possibly tell you. Nellie. The card? Alma. Card? Nellie. You dropped it. She snatches up the card and hands it to Alma. Alma. Oh, how clumsy of me. Thank you, Nellie. Joyeux Noël. To Alma from Nellie, and she looks up slowly. John? Nellie. He helped me wrap presents last night, and when we came to yours, we started talking about you. Your ears must have burned. The wind blows loudly. Alma bends stiffly forward. Alma. You mean you spoke well of me? Nellie. Well of? We raved. Simply raved. Oh, he told me the influence you'd had on him. Alma. Influence? Nellie. He told me about the wonderful talks he'd had with you last summer when he was so mixed up, and how you inspired him, and you more than anyone else was responsible for his pulling himself together after his father was killed. And he told me about... Alma rises stiffly from the bench. Where are you going, Miss Alma? Alma. To drink at the fountain? Nellie. He told me about how you came in the house that night like an angel of mercy. Alma, laughing harshly by the fountain. This is the only angel in glorious hell. She bends to drink. Her body is stone and her blood is mineral water. The wind is louder. Nellie, how penetrating the wind is. Alma. I'm going home, Nellie. You run along and deliver your presents now. She starts away. Nellie, but wait till I've told you the wonderfulest thing. Alma, I'm going home now. Goodbye. Nellie. Oh, goodbye, Miss Alma. She snatches up her festive basket and rushes in the other direction with a shrill giggle as the wind pulls at her skirts. The lights dim out. Scene 11. An hour later in John's office. The interior is framed by the traceries of Victorian architecture, and there is one irregular section of wall supporting the anatomy chart. Otherwise, the stage is open to the cyclorama. In the background, mellow golden light touches the vane of a steeple, a gilded weathercock. Also the wings of the stone angel. A singing wind rises and falls throughout the scene. John is seated at a white enameled table examining a slide through a microscope. A bell tolls the hour of 5 as Alma comes hesitantly in. She wears a russet suit and a matching hat with a plume. The light changes, the sun disappearing behind a cloud, fading from the steeple and the stone angel till the bell stops tolling. Then it brightens again. Alma. No greetings? No greetings at all? John. Hello, Miss Alma. Alma, speaking with animation to control her panic. How white it is here, such a glacial brilliance. She covers her eyes, laughing. John. New equipment. Alma. Everything new but the chart. John. The human anatomy's always the same old thing. Alma. And such a tiresome one. I've been plagued with sore throats. John. Everyone has here lately. These southern homes are all improperly heated. Open grates aren't enough. Alma. They burn the front of you while your back is freezing. John. Then you go into another room and get chilled off. Alma. Yes, chilled to the bone. John. But it never gets quite cold enough to convince the damn fools that a furnace is necessary. So they go on building without them. There's the sound of wind. Alma. Such a strange afternoon. John. Is it? I haven't been out. Alma. The Gulf wind is blowing big, white, what do they call them? Cumulus clouds over. It seemed to take the plume off my hat, like that fox terrier we had once named Jacob. Snatched the plume off a hat and dashed around and around the backyard with it like a trophy. John. I remember Jacob. What happened to him? Alma. Oh, Jacob. Jacob was a mischievous thief. We had to send him out to some friends in the country. Yes, he ended his days as a country squire. The tales of his exploits. John. Sit down, Miss Alma. Alma. If I'm disturbing you, John. No. I called the rectory when I heard you were sick. Your father told me you wouldn't see a doctor. Alma. I needed a rest. That was all. You were out of town mostly. John. I was mostly in Lyon finishing up Dad's work in the fever clinic. Alma. Covering yourself with sudden glory. John. Redeeming myself with good works. Alma. It's rather late to tell you how happy I am and also how proud. I almost feel as your father might have felt if... And are you happy now, John? John, uncomfortably not looking at her. I've settled with life on fairly acceptable terms. Isn't that all a responsible person can ask for? Alma. He can ask for much more than that. He can ask for the coming true of his most improbable dreams. John. It's best not to ask for too much. Alma. I disagree with you. I say, ask for all, but be prepared to get nothing. She springs up and crosses to the window. She continues. No, I haven't been well. I've thought many times of something you told me last summer, that I have a doppelganger. I looked that up and I found that it means another person inside me, another self. And I don't know whether to thank you or not for making me conscious of it. I haven't been well. For a while I thought I was dying, that was the change that was coming. John, when did you have that feeling? Alma. August, September. But now the Gulf wind has blown that feeling away like a cloud of smoke. And I know now I'm not dying, that it isn't going to turn out to be that simple. John. Have you been anxious about your heart again? He retreats to a professional manner and takes out a silver watch, putting his fingers on her wrist. Alma. And now the stethoscope. He removes the stethoscope from the table and starts to loosen her jacket. She looks down at his bent head. Slowly, involuntarily, her gloved hands lift and descend on the crown of his head. He gets up awkwardly. She suddenly leans toward him and presses her mouth to his. Why don't you say something? Has the cat got your tongue? John. Miss Alma, what can I say? Alma. You've gone back to calling me Miss Alma again. John. We never really got past that point with each other. Alma. Oh, yes, we did. We were so close that we almost breathed together. John, with embarrassment. I didn't know that. Alma. No. Well, I did. I knew it. Her hand touches his face tenderly. You shave more carefully now? You don't have those little razor cuts on your chin that you dusted with gardenia talcum. John. I shave more carefully now. Alma. So that explains it. Her fingers remain on his face, moving gently up and down it like a blind person reading Braille. He is intensely embarrassed and gently removes her hands from him. Is it impossible now? John, I don't think I know what you mean. Alma, you know what I mean, all right. So be honest with me. One time I said no to something. You may remember the time and all that demented howling from the cockfight. But now I've changed my mind. Or the girl who said no, she doesn't exist anymore. She died last summer, suffocated in smoke from something on fire inside her. No, she doesn't live now. But she left me her ring, you see? This one you admired, the topaz ring set in pearls. And she said to me, I looked at this ring on my finger. Remember, I died empty-handed, and so make sure that your hands have something in them. She drops her gloves. She clasps his head again in her hands. I said, but what about pride? She said, forget about pride whenever it stands between you and what you must have. He takes hold of her wrists. And then I said, but what if he doesn't want me? I don't know what she said then. I'm not sure whether she said anything or not. Her lips stopped moving. Yes, I think she stopped breathing. He gently removes her craving hands from his face. No? He shakes his head in dumb suffering. Then the answer is no. John, forcing himself to speak. I have a respect for the truth, and I have a respect for you, so I'd better speak honestly if you want me to speak. Alma nods slightly. You've won the argument that we had between us. Alma. What argument? John. The one about the chart. Alma. Oh, the chart. She turns from him and wanders across to the chart. She gazes up at it with closed eyes and her hands clasped in front of her. John. It shows that we're not a package of rose leaves, that every interior inch of us is taken up with something ugly and functional, and no room seems to be left for anything else in there. Alma. No. John. But I've come around to your way of thinking, that something else is in there, an immaterial something, as thin as smoke, which all of those ugly machines combine to produce, and that's their whole reason for being. It can't be seen, so it can't be shown on the chart. But it's there just the same. And knowing it's there, why then the whole thing, this unfathomable experience of ours, takes on a new value, like some wildly romantic work in a laboratory, don't you see? The wind comes up very loud, almost like a choir of voices. Both of them turn slightly, Alma raising a hand to her plumed head as if she were outdoors. Alma. Yes, I see. Now that you no longer want it to be otherwise, you're willing to believe that a spiritual bond can exist between us two? John. Can't you believe that I am sincere about it? Alma. Maybe you are. But I don't want to be talked to like some incurably sick patient you have to comfort. A harsh and strong note comes into her voice. Oh, I suppose I am sick. One of those weak and divided people who slip like shadows among you solid, strong ones. But sometimes out of necessity, we shadowy people take on a strength of our own. I have that now. You needn't try to deceive me. John. I wasn't. Alma. You needn't try to comfort me. I haven't come here on any but equal terms. You said, let's talk truthfully. Well, let's do. Unsparingly, truthfully, even shamelessly then. It's no longer a secret that I love you. It never was. I loved you as long ago as the time I asked you to read the stone angel's name with your fingers. Yes, I remember the long afternoons of our childhood, when I had to stay indoors to practice my music, and heard your playmates calling you Johnny, Johnny. How it went through me just to hear your name called. And how I rushed to the window to watch you jump the porch railing. I stood at a distance halfway down the block, only to keep in sight of your torn red sweater racing about the vacant lot you played in. Yes, it had begun that early, this affliction of love, and has never let go of me since, but kept on growing. I've lived next door to you all the days of my life, a weak and divided person who stood in adoring awe of your singleness, of your strength. And that is my story. Now I wish you would tell me why it didn't happen between us. Why did I fail? Why did you come close enough and no closer? John, whenever we've gotten together, the 3 or 4 times that we have, Alma, as few as that? John, it's only been 3 or 4 times that we've come face to face. And each of those times, we seemed to be trying to find something in each other without knowing what it was that we wanted to find. It wasn't a body hunger, although I acted as if I thought it might be the night I wasn't a gentleman at the. It wasn't the physical you that I really wanted. Alma, I know, you've already. John, you didn't have that to give me. Alma, not at that time. John, you had something else to give. Alma, what did I have? John strikes a match. Unconsciously, he holds his curved palm over the flame of the match to warm it. It is a long kitchen match, which makes a good flame. They both stare at it with a sorrowful understanding that is still perplexed. It is about to burn his fingers. She leans forward and blows it out. Then she puts on her gloves. John, you couldn't name it, and I couldn't recognize it. I thought it was just a puritanical ice that glittered like a flame. But now I believe it was flame, mistaken for ice. I still don't understand it. But I know it was there, just as I know that your eyes and your voice are the 2 most beautiful things I've ever known. And also the warmest, although they don't seem to be set in your body at all. Alma, you talk as if my body had ceased to exist for you, John, in spite of the fact that you've just counted my pulse. Yes, that's it. You tried to avoid it, but you've told me plainly. The tables have turned. Yes, the tables have turned with a vengeance. You come around to my old way of thinking, and I to yours, like 2 people exchanging a call on each other at the same time, and each one finding the other gone out. The door locked against him, and no one to answer the bell. She laughs. I came here to tell you that being a gentleman doesn't seem so important to me anymore. But you're telling me I've got to remain a lady. She laughs rather violently. The tables have turned with a vengeance. The air in here smells of ether. It's making me dizzy. John, I'll open a window. Alma, please. John, there now. Alma, thank you, that's better. Do you remember those little white tablets you gave me? I've used them all up and I'd like to have some more. John, I'll write a prescription for you. He bends to write. Nellie is in the waiting room. They hear her voice. Alma. Someone is waiting in the waiting room, John. one of my vocal pupils, the youngest and prettiest one with the least gift for music, the one that helped wrap up this handkerchief, that you helped wrap up this handkerchief for me. She takes it out and touches her eyes with it. The door opens, first a crack. Nellie peers in and giggles. Then she throws the door wide open with a peal of merry laughter. She has Holly pinned on her jacket. She rushes up to John and hugs him with childish squeals. Nellie, I've been all over town just shouting. John, shouting what? Nellie, glad tidings. John looks at Alma over Nellie's shoulder. John, I thought we weren't going to tell anyone for a while. Nellie, I couldn't stop myself. She wheels about. Oh, Alma, he hasn't told you? Alma, quietly. He didn't need to, Nellie. I guessed. From the Christmas card with your 2 names written on it. Nellie rushes over to Alma and hugs her. Over Nellie's shoulder, Alma looks at John. He makes a thwarted gesture as if he wanted to speak. She smiles desperately and shakes her head. She closes her eyes and bites her lips for a moment. Then she releases Nellie with a laugh of exaggerated gaiety. Nellie, so Alma, you really were the first to know. Alma, I'm proud of that, Nellie. Nellie, see on my finger? This was the present I couldn't tell you about. Alma, oh, what a lovely, lovely solitaire. But solitaire is such a wrong name for it. Solitaire means single, and this means 2. It's blinding, Nellie. Why? It hurts my eyes. John catches Nellie's arm and pulls her to him. Almost violently, Alma lifts her face. It is bathed in tears. She nods gratefully to John for releasing her from Nellie's attention. She picks up her gloves and purse. John, excuse her, Miss Alma. Nellie's still such a child. Alma with a breathless laugh. I've got to run along now. John, don't leave your prescription. Alma. Oh yes, where's my prescription? John, on the table. Alma, I'll take it to the drugstore right away. Nellie struggles to free herself from John's embrace, which keeps her from returning to Alma. Nellie. Alma, don't go. Johnny, let go of me, Johnny. You're hugging me so tight I can't breathe. Alma. Goodbye. Nellie. Alma, you know you're going to sing at the wedding. The very first Sunday in spring, which will be Palm Sunday. The voice that breathed over Eden. Alma has closed the door. John shuts his eyes tight with a look of torment. He rains kisses on Nellie's forehead and throat and lips. The scene dims out with music. Scene 12. In the park near the Angel of the Fountain, about dusk. Alma enters the lighted area and goes slowly up to the fountain and bends to drink. Then she removes a small white package from her pocketbook and starts to unwrap it. While she is doing this, a young man comes along. He is dressed in a checked suit and a derby. He passes by the bench. They glance at each other. A train whistles in the distance. The young man clears his throat. The train whistle is repeated. The young man crosses toward the fountain, his eyes on Alma. She hesitates with the unwrapped package in her hand. Then she crosses toward the bench and stands hesitantly in front of it. He stuffs his hands in his pockets and whistles. He glances with an effect of unconcern back over his shoulder. Alma pushes her veil back with an uncertain gesture. His whistle dies out. He sways back and forth on his heels as the train whistles again. He suddenly turns to the fountain and bends to drink. Alma slips the package back into her purse. As the young man straightens up, she speaks in a barely audible voice. Alma. The water is cool. The young man eagerly. Did you say something? Alma, I said The water is cool. The young man. Yes, it sure is. It's nice and cool. Alma. It's always cool. The young man. Is it? Alma. Yes. Yes, even in summer. It comes from deep underground. The young man. That's what keeps it cool. Alma. Glorious Hill is famous for its artesian springs. The young man. I didn't know that. The young man jerkily removes his hands from his pockets. She gathers confidence before the awkwardness of his youth. Alma. Are you a stranger in town? The young man. I'm a traveling salesman. Alma. Ah, you're a salesman who travels. She laughs gently. But you're younger than most of them are, and not so fat. The young man. I'm just starting out. I travel for Red Goose shoes. Alma. Ah, the Delts your territory? The young man. From the Peabody lobby to Catfish Row in Vicksburg. Alma leans back and looks at him under half-closed lids, perhaps a little suggestively. Alma. The life of a traveling salesman is interesting, but lonely. The young man. You're right about that. Hotel bedrooms are lonely. There's a pause. Far away, the train whistles again. Alma. All rooms are lonely where there is only one person. Her eyes fall shut. The young man gently. You're tired, aren't you? Alma. I? Tired? She starts to deny it, then laughs faintly and confesses the truth. Yes, a little. But I shall rest now. I've just taken one of my sleeping tablets. The young man. So early? Alma. Oh, it won't put me to sleep. It will just quiet my nerves. The young man. What are you nervous about? Alma. I want an argument this afternoon. The young man. There's nothing to be nervous over. You ought to be nervous if you lost one. Alma. It wasn't the argument I wanted to win. The young man. Well, I'm nervous too. Alma. What over? The young man. It's my first job and I'm scared of not making good. That mysteriously sudden intimacy that sometimes occurs between strangers more completely than old friends or lovers moves them both. Alma hands the package of tablets to him. Alma. Then you must take one of my tablets. The young man. Should I? Alma. Please take one. The young man. Yes, I shall. Alma. You'll be surprised how infinitely merciful they are. The prescription number is 96814. I think of it as the telephone number of God. They both laugh. He places one of the tablets on his tongue and crosses to the fountain to wash it down. The young man to the stone figure. Thanks, Angel. He gives her a little salute and crosses back to Alma. Alma. Life is full of little mercies like that. Not big mercies, but comfortable little mercies. And so we are able to keep on going. She has leaned back with half-closed eyes. The young man returning. You're falling asleep. Alma. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm just closing my eyes. You know what I feel like now? I feel like a water lily. The young man. A water lily? Alma. Yes, I feel like a water lily on a Chinese lagoon. Won't you sit down? The young man does. My name is Alma. Spanish for soul. What's yours? The young man. Mine's Archie Kramer. Mucho gusto, as they say in Spain. Alma. ¿Usted habla español, señor? The young man. Un poquito. ¿Usted habla español, señorita? Alma. Mi también. Un poquito. The young man delightedly. Aha, sometimes un poquito is plenty. Elma laughs in a little different way than she's ever laughed before, a little warily, but quite naturally. The young man leans toward her confidently. What's there to do in this town after dark? Elma. There's not much to do in this town after dark, but there are resorts on the lake that offer all kinds of after dark entertainment. There's one called Moon Lake Casino. It's under new management now, but I don't suppose its character has changed. The young man. What was its character? Alma. Gay. Very gay, Mr. Kramer. The young man. Then what in the hell are we sitting here for? Vamonos. Alma. Como no, senor? The young man. Ha ha ha. He jumps up. I'll call a taxi. He goes off shouting taxi. Alma rises from the bench. As she crosses to the fountain, the grave mood of the play is reinstated with a phrase of music. She faces the stone angel and raises her gloved hand in a sort of valedictory salute. Then she turns slowly about toward the audience with her hand still raised in a gesture of wonder and finality as the curtain falls.